Welcome back to Reading with Miss Michelle. Today we're going to read Wayside School is Falling Down by Louis Sachar, Chapter 16. If you have a copy, go get it so you can read along with me. Don't forget to help us out by liking, subscribing, and sharing this video with all of your friends. Chapter 16. Love and a Dead Rat. Damian was in love with one of the girls in his class. Can you guess which one? He thought about her all the time. Myron threw a red ball to Damian. It bounced off his face. "Huh," said Damian. "Why don't you catch the ball?" asked Myron. "What ball?" asked Damian. "The one that hit you in the face," said Myron. "Did a ball hit me in the face?" asked Damian. "Yes," said Myron. "Oh, good," said Damian. "I was wondering why my nose hurt." He had been thinking about the girl he loved. He was in love with Mrs. Jules. That was why he was always doing things for her, like passing out papers. He thought she was very pretty and nice. He thought she was smart, too. In fact, he thought she was one of the smartest people in the class. After recess, he hurried back up the stairs. "Hello, Damian," said Mrs. Jules. "Hello, Mrs. Jules," he said. "You're always the first one here, aren't you?" asked Mrs. Jules. Damian blushed and shrugged his shoulders. "Do you need any papers passed out or anything?" he asked. "It's so nice of you to ask," said Mrs. Jules. "I think you're nice too," said Damian. Mrs. Jules gave him a stack of workbooks to hand out. Then she gave him a Tootsie Roll Pop from the coffee can on her desk for being so helpful. "But don't eat it until after lunch," she said. "I won't," he assured her. He ate lunch with Myron and DJ. He saved his Tootsie Roll Pop for last. Joy and Mauricia came up behind him. "Hi, Damian," said Joy. "How's your girlfriend?" "What?" asked Damian. He turned red. "Who are you talking about? I don't have a girlfriend." "You're in love with Mrs. Jules," accused Mauricia. "You better watch out," said Joy. "Mr. Jules might come after you." The two girls laughed. "I don't know what you're talking about," said Damian. "I'm not in love with Mrs. Jules." He looked to his friends for support. Myron shrugged. DJ smiled. "Prove it," said Joy. "Prove you're not in love with her." "That's stupid," said Damian. "How can I prove I'm not in love with Mrs. Jules?" "Give her this," said Joy. She handed Damian a paper bag. "Your lunch?" asked Damian. "Look inside," said Mauricia. Inside the paper bag was a dead rat. Damian knew Mrs. Jules hated dead rats more than anything in the world. "Put it on her desk," said Joy. "If you don't, it means you love her," said Mauricia. "I'm not in love with her," said Damian. "Prove it," said Joy. "Okay, I will," said Damian. The girls left. "You don't have to put the dead rat in her desk," said DJ. "We don't care," said Myron. "You think I'm in love with her too, don't you?" asked Damian. Myron shrugged. DJ smiled. "Some friends you are," said Damian. "I'll show you." After lunch, he was the first one back in class. He carried Joy's paper sack. "Hello, Damian," said Mrs. Jules. "Did you have a nice lunch?" "It was all right," he muttered. "Oh, would you mind getting the construction paper from the closet and putting it on my desk?" asked Mrs. Jules. "Thank you." Damian went to the closet and got the construction paper. He put it on her desk. Then, when she wasn't looking, he opened her desk drawer and dumped the dead rat into it. He shut the drawer. "Thank you, Damian," said Mrs. Jules. "You're always so helpful. It's such a pleasure to have you in my class." Damian felt awful. Mrs. Jules read a story to the class. Damian couldn't pay attention. He kept wondering when she'd open her drawer. After the story, they had art. Everyone was supposed to make snowflakes. Damian folded his piece of construction paper in half. Mrs. Jules screamed. "What's wrong, Mrs. Jules?" asked Joy. "Somebody put a dead rat in my desk," said Mrs. Jules. "I did," declared Damian. "Damian?" Mrs. Jules said with great surprise. "Why?" "Because I hate you," said Damian. "You're always making me do things for you." "Oh, I see," said Mrs. Jules. "Should I write my name on the board under discipline?" he asked. "No, that won't be necessary," said Mrs. Jules. That made him feel even worse. Why did I have to prove myself to Joy? He wondered. I don't like Joy. I like Mrs. Jules. He felt rotten. When the bell rang, Damian waited for all the other kids to leave. Then he walked to Mrs. Jules' desk. She was grading papers. "Yes, Damian?" "Do you want me to erase the board for you?" he asked. "That's all right," said Mrs. Jules. "I'll do it myself." Damian sadly walked out of the room and down the stairs. When he reached the bottom, he turned and ran all the way back up to Mrs. Jules' room. She was putting on her coat. "I love you, Mrs. Jules," Damian declared. "I'm sorry I put the dead rat in your desk. I did it because I didn't want everyone to know I loved you. I'm sorry." "I love you too, Damian," said Mrs. Jules. "You do? But what about Mr. Jules?" "Just because I love Mr. Jules, it doesn't mean I can't also love you. Love is different from most things." She picked up a piece of chalk. "If I gave my piece of chalk to someone, then I wouldn't have it anymore. But when I give my love to someone, I end up with more love than I started with. The more love you give away, the more you have left." Damian smiled. "I love you, Mrs. Jules," he said. He felt his heart fill up with more love. "I love you, Damian," said Mrs. Jules. "This is getting disgusting," said the dead rat. It climbed out of Mrs. Jules' desk and walked out of the room. The end. Thanks for joining me for Chapter 16. Please check back for Chapter 17. Don't forget to help us out by liking, subscribing, and sharing this video with all of your friends. I hope you join me next time. Bye.